Hello and thank you for joining this webinar today from us here at Cookdown, where we are very proud to unveil Connection Center 4.0, which is our biggest release yet. We've spent literally months on this thing, so I'm really pleased to be able to bring this to you, and not with some kind of caveat that it's in beta form, but you can actually get your hands on everything I show you today at the end of the webinar. So let's dig into what's new, starting with the Webhooks inbound capability, which is all about raising alerts in SCOM from webhooks. So in other words, allowing you to connect up any old system to raise alerts in SCOM without writing any code. So let's have a quick look at the basics. This is the stuff that isn't new, but is kind of fundamental and foundational to understanding the webhooks product, essentially. So on SCOM, we import our management pack, Connection Center, and it stands up a listener that will listen for webhooks. And the idea is every time a webhook is received, an alert is raised in SCOM. And it's great. It works really well. It's all UI driven, no code is required. Fantastic. However, this is a bit crude because we don't want a webhook to be turned into an alert every single time, because as we all know, alerts we want to close. We don't want to have to do that ourselves. And in the source system, if there's anything similar to an alert that has a notion of state, we can harness this and hook it up to our alert states. And so that is the first cool thing to show you and talk about today. So the ability to sync alert and state. So rather than just having every webhook just be raised as an alert, now we know, because we've defined in the configuration, which property, which parameter from the received webhook maps to a specific state and to a specific object. So now we know which parameter of the received webhook equates to an open and which equates to a closed. So when we receive an open, we open an alert, and when we receive a close for that same thing, we can close off the alert. Great, really good piece of functionality, saves a load of time. But that's not all. The next thing that we go on to talk about is, well, sometimes we get webhooks that are essentially the same, and rather than raise all of them as a new alert, as in the basic case, we want to increment the repeat count essentially on the existing alert before ultimately combining it with that close functionality to have the alerts closed off when a webhook is received that equates to it closing. So let's have a look at this in action before we get any further, because there's a lot we've covered here already. So let's dig into a demo. Alright, so here we are in the SCOM console, and we're looking at the administration pane, and we're under our Connection Center Management Packs UI, and we're looking at inbound alerts essentially, and we have a bunch of connections here. We're going to show you the premise of how you basically create one from scratch, and then look at some we created earlier. So if I go to Add Connection up here in the top right corner, and we are going to pick a webhooks listening connector, like this. This will fire up a wizard. We're going to give our connector a name. Now I'm going to create one that I'm going to call blank webhook connector. You'll see here that we've got the URL we're going to be able to post our webhooks to. We have global listener settings here. These are globally defined over here. I'm not going to edit them right now. And I've got an enable disable for each individual connection. I'm next asked for a sample payload. So this is essentially the shape of the webhook payloads that this connection will be handling. Now I can either provide a sample one, or I can use the last received one. Now this is really useful because quite a few systems you can't get a sort of sample payload from really easily. So it's easier just to set up a blank connection like I'm doing now, then post a webhook to that connector to see the shape of what's sent. And that's essentially my plan. So I'm going to create a blank one, so I'm going to leave this blank here and come back and edit this to then use details from what I push in a moment. I'm going to leave all my alert settings blank. These are the settings that will take effect for all webhooks received and raise them as alerts using information here. The idea is we're going to replace this boilerplate text with parameterized bits and pieces. that pull from bits of information from the webhooks received. But for now, we're going to leave this blank and come back and modify it later. The same deal is true for the custom fields on alerts, so you can use the parameters from received webhooks to customize what goes into the custom fields essentially as well. But for now, we're going to leave that blank too. Later down the line, we're going to talk about alert state mapping and manual object creation. But for now, we're going to stick with the basics. We're then going to pick a management pack to save this in. The default one is the Connection Center Configuration Management Pack, which is a management pack that contains all of the connectors, which is great for creating something in a non-prod environment and then migrating it to prod. You then get a summary of what you're creating, and I will hit finish. So I may break my demo video at this point and come back to this, because what you'll see is this connector is now in initial discovery state. So what's happening under the covers is SCOM is actually discovering this connector. And as we all know, SCOM will not be hurried. So I have to wait until this discovery is completed. After that discovery completes, we run a connection test to make sure everything is set up and the listener is up and ready to receive alerts. What I'm actually going to do, I've just noticed my previously unconfigured webhook connector, which is another blank one, exactly the same as the one you just saw me created, is online. It's just passed its connection tests and everything. We're going to send a webhook to this and see what it does. Its configuration is exactly the same as the blank one we just created. Now, to do this, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use Postman. Postman will essentially simulate what a real system would do, posting a webhook. This is obviously in the JSON format, and this is an example webhook that is the sort of thing you'll get out of Prometheus. So you'll see here, I've pointed at here, the unconfigured webhook connector, and I'm going to hit send. You'll see here this did work. It has inserted an event. So if I go now back to SCOM and I go to the monitoring tab, what I'll see in a minute is, because we essentially under the covers have a rule that raises everything received as alerts based on a webhook being received, you will see an alert. And this is my boilerplate text, so its title is new webhook alert. Its description is not helpful here. This was triggered by the event being received, but that's okay, because in the details of this alert is the full event that was received. If I right click the alert, go to properties and go to the alert context here, you'll see I've got the raw JSON of what was received here. Just at the moment, we're not using any of it to shape and form alerts, but that's okay. So now if I go back to administration and go back to my unconfigured webhook, which should be blank, and go to modify connection over here, we're going to use some of the bits and pieces from that webhook to shape the alerts. So on this next screen, we would have started on provider sample payload and had the blank thing here, but now we have the option to use last received payload, and this is my last received payload. So all of these properties I can pull from. So now let's see, what have we got? We've got alerts at status and alert DC. I'm going to pick on those two, and FQDN, for example. So now in my alert settings, I'm going to blow away my boilerplate text, and I'm going to use the liquid format to start to build out my alerts. So I'm going to start by going alert 0, and we'll close that off. Did I get that right? Alerts plural, not alerts single. And we're going to see what that property contains. Here we go. And we're going to dot walk all of the sub properties of alerts. So I can see I've got status, and the result here is firing. So if I go dot status, you'll see in the bottom I get the word firing. So you get the idea. So I can mix this with plain text as well. So webhook received with the status, and then firing. Obviously this will change based on what we get from machine. Making this up obviously as I go here. Alerts 0 dot, I think it was FQDN was the sub property there from machine. Let's just check I got that right. If I go back again, FQDN. It's because it was under labels, alerts, labels. So I've got one more level to go. So now I've got alert 0.labels.fqdn, and I see the FQDN of the machine in question. You get the idea. We can use all the properties here and use the liquid format to extract them. We can also manipulate them using the liquid format as well. Let's see, what else have we got? We've got alerts.labels.job or something. Let's pick on that. We're going to put that in one of our custom fields. I'm just going to cheat rather than type it all out freehand and just paste in what I've got there and just change the last piece to what was it again? To DC. Let's use the DC property. Labels.dc. This is case sensitive, so it's important I get the casing right. If I don't get it wrong, I'll just see plain text. So we're going to next finish through the rest of the wizard to make these changes live and hit finish. This will take a while because, again, discovery needs to happen. Let's give it a little refresh and see how we're going. Because then what I'm going to do is send in that same webhook. Essentially, you'll see, look, it's gone into configuration loading state. It'll be in that state for a moment. So I'll break the video here. And what we'll do is we'll come back to it when the configuration has loaded. It's doing a rediscover in SCOM. You'll see the saved configuration here doesn't match the discovered configuration or the active listener configuration. So you can see it working its way through SCOM here, but we have to essentially wait. So I'll break the video at this point. Okay, so good news. You can see that the rediscovery is completed. Saved configuration, discovered configuration, and active listener configuration are all the same. Hooray! So we're going to go back to Postman and hit send once more on our alert. And then we're going to go back into the monitoring tab and have a look for that alert. We're going to wait for it to come in. And there it is. So the first thing I see is I forgot to update the alert name when I was configuring, when I updated the description. But I can tell this is the correct alert, that my changes were live because my description matches what I put. We've got the parameters replaced with real parameters, such as firing and the machine name. I can also see in custom field 1, my DC parameter has been enacted, is in effect. So there we go. That's the first thing to show. The next thing to talk about is the syncing of state, essentially, of alerts. Because if I were to send that same thing again, I would get another alert. And really, I'd want my repeat count incremented. And then I want to be able to close off that alert when the alert closes in the source system. So for this one, I'm going to use a different connector with slightly different configuration, so I'm not fiddling around with JSON quite so much. So this one, if I go into the modify screen and next to this first screen, I have a fictitious, more simple payload, just to illustrate the point, with state in as well. This is the shape of it, but here we have status information, which is what I was looking for. And this is my alert settings. So I've given it, in this case, I've given it a better name. I've used the parameters of server from this to put the server name in here. The event parameter is the description of what's wrong. There's a detailed message, which is sort of remediation steps. Give it a kick in this case, obviously fictitious. We've got the state name itself and the FQDN, all very useful things. I've put the IP address from my payload into custom field 1. But the thing to show you now is this alert state mapping. So in the first configuration you saw, I said no to this. This time we're going to set this up. So this is all about using properties from the received webhook to identify which webhooks equate to the same object in the source system and which parameters equate to the place where you might find an open and close type thing, and then what to look for something that's closed. So in this case, I'm using my details.server property, which contains my server name, for the thing to match on, as these webhooks, one or many, are relating to the same machine. Let me just bring back up that sample payload. So in the details here, details server, that's what this looks like. Going back to alert state. The next thing I see here is I have used status text, which contains the word open, which is where I'm telling connection center to look for the open close state information. In the received payload, this is the word open, the string open. I'm telling this to use the word close to identify a webhook that has been received if it matches the server as closed. You'll see I've got a little triangle here saying essentially what's in this payload that you've received doesn't match this, but that's okay. I've pushed through the open one, not the closed one, but you get the idea. At the moment we have no object creation. I'll come on to this in a minute. Everything's stored in the same management pack, and there you go, there's the summary. So I'm going to cancel out of this because I don't want to cause more discovery required. So this one is called alerts with open close. So back into Postman now. I'm going to go into my alerts with open close example. This is the exact same webhook that we just saw having been received. So if I were to send this one through, I get my event inserted, which is always good. And if I go through to the monitoring tab, I'm expecting to see an alert, which looks like the example that was in the console a second ago. We'll just give this a moment, and there it is. It's got the name, alerts that open and close from Webhook demo, and the description matches what I was expecting. I've got my IP address in custom field 1. Good, it's working. Before we go on to actually close this, the next thing I'll just quickly show you is incrementing the repeat count. So I'm going to again send in this exact same alert, and what I'm expecting to happen is you see repeat count was set to 0. I'm expecting this to go up to 1. And this is possible because we know, we've told in the configuration here, that if it comes in from this server and it looks the same, then it's the same. And everything else in this alert is exactly the same, so you can see it's incremented the repeat count, which is great. A good way to reduce spam from far-side systems that might send things in multiple times. No problem, SCOM can handle that with repeat count. Fantastic. The next thing we're going to do is to actually close this thing off. So in my payload, I'm going to replace the word open with the word close. And I'm going to hit send once more. Event inserted. And if I go back to SCOM, I'm expecting this to get closed off and to disappear in a second. So let's not blink and miss it. And there it goes. It's been closed off. So there we go. All very cool stuff, I'm sure you'll agree, but there's still more to show you. So next up, we're going to talk about adding in objects. So far, everything that we have shown you has been raised against an automatically created object for each connector, which works okay. It does the job, you get alerts out the other end, but it would be much better if we can actually add in objects into SCOM to raise our alerts against. With Connection Center Webhooks in this new version in Connection Center 4, we can do this from CSV or by freehand typing alerts, by freehand typing object names, and then go one step beyond and add a monitor to each of these objects so that they go red when they have alerts against them, which are all generated obviously by our webhook. The additional piece of information is to map the webhooks received to a specific object so that we can do exactly that, to make them go red when an alert is raised against them, and ultimately the other way around as well. So in the case of this bottom one, we're closing off one of our alerts to make it go green again afterwards. So that's the next cool thing to show you. So here we are back in the SCOM console, and I'm going to use another new connector just to save us watching discovery happen or me having to edit it out of the video. Here we have one called alerts with objects from CSV, and if I go into the modifier of this one, you'll see same stuff to see here so far. No sample payload yet received, but we'll come on to this in a minute. I know what the sample payload is going to look like. It's going to be the same one we used a second ago with our last demo example. So I've already provided the template, although right now in the example it has blanks because there's not been a payload received, not the end of the world. You'll see again I've put the IP address in custom field 1. We have alert states configured in exactly the same way as before. So we're using the identifier of server, we're using the status text parameter, which contains open or close, matching for closed on the word close. So we're layering this functionality with our manual object creation feature. So this is the new piece. So last time I demoed this, I had no manual object creation. This time we're going to manually configure objects. And you'll see here that I've added some manually created objects. So you can do this by loading a CSV containing these columns with these headers, or you could just freehand type them, into the UI here. I'm going to call this one whatever. And if I were to next finish through the wizard, it would close. So the other thing you'll see here is we're asked for an object key template. This is essentially which parameter of the received webhook equates to object key, this column here. And that's what we're going to use to match on to go, this alert has come from this webhook and should be raised against this object. I'm using my ID parameter. If I go back to Prometheus, just to give you this here, details ID contains a numeric value, in this case 1. So there we are. If I then next finish, again everything here is exactly the same. I'm not going to complete the wizard because it's already done. I don't want to cause more rediscovery and config churn. So I'm going to now go ahead and push from Postman into alerts with objects from CSV, which is the name of my connection. Oh, I've typed it wrong. Alerts with objects from CSV. Alerts with objects from, it's case sensitive, lowercase f. I'm guessing that's what it is. Let's see. That looks better. Event inserted, message successfully attached to alerts with objects from CSV. Great. So now if I go back into SCOM and we have a look in the monitoring pane and under active alerts, there it is. And you would see the object that it is associated with is the database ops22db, which is our manually created object, which is awesome. Just quickly, just to pop into discovered inventory, if you change target type to this one, which is the Cookdown Webhook guest objects class, you'll see all of those manually created objects as like any other object in SCOM. And look, there we go, SCOM's refreshed and the health of my ops22db has gone red. So the monitor is working as expected. It's gone red because there is an alert. Perfect. So the next thing to talk about is the ability to put machine servers into maintenance mode from Webhook, which is really, really cool. One of those things that is going to be super useful for PowerShell in the case of automation, but also potentially if you have a system that will send through everything you need, which is essentially a list of server IDs and the duration of maintenance mode. So when received, you can put the servers in question into maintenance mode. So here I am back in the SCOM console. We're going to have a look at that now. I have, in traditional demo style, a connection already ready and waiting for me, which is under maintenance mode, inbound requests. If I modify this connection so you can see, so it has a name, it has a URL that it will accept webhooks on, it's enabled, global listener settings there. You get an example of the sort of payload that this is expecting to receive, which I will modify in Postman in a second. We can configure whether maintenance windows can be modified or not. The payload contains just the duration, so this is to put machines into maintenance mode immediately rather than scheduled maintenance mode. Again, it's stored in a management pack, and that's what there is to see. So I have already got this set up. So now let's go to Postman. And here is my payload. These are 2 real machines in my lab, and let's just check I've got this URL right. I have, and it's a post, right. So if I hit send, we have in return a more detailed message than normal. We have maintenance status returned for the objects we put into maintenance mode. These ones here, the start and end date and times, which is 60 minutes from now. And if I go back into SCOM and go to discovered inventory and I find those machines, these 2, I think it was, and give it a moment and a refresh. Oh yeah, refresh is what it took. You can see they are in maintenance mode. So there you go. Really, really awesome. Really, really useful for automation, as said. So the next thing to talk about, though no demo for this one, is the ability to go beyond simply raising alerts. So essentially, when webhooks are received, SCOM is storing events, and from those events we're raising alerts and doing cool things with them. But ultimately, every time you send in a webhook, an event is stored. there is a mode in Connection Center that allows you to just raise events. Now, why is this cool? Because it lets you use all of SCOM's native monitoring cool stuff to build rules, monitors, and everything else on top of the events to do things you couldn't otherwise do with just straightforward alerts. So it allows you to unlock an easy way for getting data into SCOM in the form of events to do what you want with, rather than the more prescriptive but simpler way in which we've handled raising alerts so far. So that's really cool. No demo to show you of that exactly. So now we're going to move on to Cookdown Discovery, which used to be, until this release, a standalone product that lived in its own management pack. Rather than whip through slides for this, I'm just going to dig into the SCOM console and show you what's changed. So here we are back in the SCOM console, and we're looking at Discovery of old, which was in the old ServiceNow connector management pack. This is what it used to look like. And it worked very well, but it was a standard standalone management pack as opposed to being integrated into Connection Center. If I scroll up now to Connection Center, you'll see objects outbound, and here is one I have configured earlier, essentially a discovery I've created earlier. Exactly the same functionality for the most part, but here in Connection Center, so for a unified experience. If I modify my connection now, you'll see very familiar settings. So you provide information around ServiceNow's URL, the CMDB discovery source. We're asked whether we want to sync applications or not. We pick our sample objects and class and everything from SCOM. We provide our payload in exactly the same format, no changes to any of this at all, which is then validated in exactly the same way. You see an example of the keys being replaced for each object from SCOM as before. We can enable a schedule or not. It's stored in a management pack, which is a change. This was originally not stored in a standalone management pack in the same way. So this is an advancement here, which is great. But essentially, other than that, everything in Discovery in this area is the same. There's one extra thing to show you, or to mention essentially, which I glossed over quickly. Up until this release, on this screen here, when we were talking about syncing applications, we allowed you to sync only squared-up created enterprise applications. From this release onwards, we have the ability to sync distributed applications. So that's those created natively in SCOM as well. Which adds a bit more capability as far as syncing of applications is concerned. And that's what's new in Discovery. Final thing to talk about is other bits and pieces that are new in Connection Center in general, the suite at large. So there are a few other bits and pieces. This one is a big deal, but we've made a lot of performance improvements in the area of ServiceNow alerting. To the tune of kind of 10 times the performance. So we now will allow 300 alerts a minute for an extended period of time. Which is fantastic. So if you're running a large scale or very busy SCOM deployment, have no fear, we can handle the load. We have SCOM 2022 supports and a whole bunch of bug fixes. Nothing of particular note, but loads and loads of them. So there you have it. Connection Center is awesome. We've been working really hard on it, and we hope you're as excited about it as we are. As with all of our products, you can get a trial on our website. If you go to cookdown.com/connection-center, you can get a trial now. And if you're an existing customer, you can expect the download link very, very soon. All that's left to do is say thank you very much for watching this release webinar. I hope it's made sense and you've enjoyed it. And if there are any questions, we will take them now.